Russia and Ukraine are meeting in Istanbul today for their first direct talks in more than 3 years. The two countries sent delegations to the negotiations after Putin spurned an offer by Zelenskyy to meet face-to-face. The US has also sent a team, although Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters last night he didn't have high expectations for the negotiations.
The only way we're going to have a breakthrough here is between President Trump and President Putin.
For more on this, our international editor, Emma Murphy, is in Kyiv for us. Emma, what is the latest then this morning where you are?
Well, the conversations have got underway in Turkey. We know that this morning there has been a trilateral meeting between the United States, Ukraine, and also Turkey, who are hosting these talks. And that was to basically flesh out where this goes, what the topics will be with the Russian delegation when they join, and how Ukraine wants to proceed with these negotiations. And the second of the two meetings of the day is between the four nations, between Ukraine and Russia, Turkey and the United States. But the Russian delegation has offered concerns about the presence of both the United States and Turkey in these talks. They say that they would rather have direct negotiations, as were proposed, directly with Ukraine and without the others being present. So that's one of those issues that's already causing a problem. And it gives you a kind of scene setter for just how fraught these talks are going to be. As you explained there, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, doesn't have particularly high hopes for what could be achieved. And I don't think anybody here has, or indeed in the Ukrainian delegation either, because they come at this from completely different positions. The Russians say that this is a pickup on the 2022 talks that were basically some kind of capitulation process and proposal that was put to Ukraine. Ukraine are in a very different position 3 years on in this war. They're still holding on and they will not capitulate. They say that they don't want to talk about long-term peace. They first of all want to talk about that 30-day ceasefire that we've been discussing during the course of this week. And that basically without a ceasefire, they cannot have talks about a longer peace, because they will not talk about peace whilst under continual fire.
Now, Emma, we heard yesterday Trump say nothing will really happen until Putin and I get together. That kind of then dilutes any hope that something can come of this. What is the expectation? Is any progress likely to be made from today?
Well, I think there was a feeling yesterday that these talks were torpedoed before they even begun, when President Trump spoke and made those comments about that nothing would happen unless he and President Putin had a direct conversation. Of course, that's President Trump's view. It's not necessarily shared by President Putin, however much bonhomie he wants to try and project to the world stage. But, you know, there does seem to be a feeling that that is what's going to make the big difference here. It may or it may not. There's a lot of talk about being a great deal maker, but just take a look at Gaza and we're nowhere near a deal there. But there seems to be a sense that in the coming weeks, President Trump is going to propose a meeting with President Putin. It may or may not bear fruit. I think it really does overshadow these talks in Istanbul, though, and there is a feeling that there is a B team from the Russian operation on this, that it's not senior members of the Russian administration. Certainly President Zelenskyy, when we were with him earlier this week, was saying that basically there is only one person who makes these decisions in Russia, and that is President Putin. So there's absolutely no point having conversations with anybody else. And that was why he flew to Turkey. He is not involved in these talks today because he would expect it to be leader to leader. And of course, President Putin is not there. The conversations that are taking place are with lower level delegations, although still fairly senior members of the Ukrainian administration. I think it is unlikely we'll see any great progress. I think it is likely that we'll just hear more vitriol from both sides. And at the same time, the war that is being waged in this country will continue. We've had multiple strikes across the territory over the course of the night and also this morning, and a significant attack on a railway station in Kherson, one of the areas that was previously occupied by Ukraine and is now very close to the front line. So although the peace talks are going on, the war is going on with greater vengeance here in Ukraine.
Emma, just before you go, I mean, as I've kind of watched and read and listened to the comings and goings of this week, and do correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, wasn't this, you know, the idea of this the two delegations coming together in Turkey, wasn't this Putin's idea in the first place? Why do you think he then, snubbed it and sent the B team, if you like, and this whole, I think I remember it flashing up on my phone, and instantly you get that kind of glimmer of hope. Ooh, is this real? Is this serious? Are they actually, the two main men, going to get together and bring something real and hopeful about? Why then does it get reduced to this, do you think?
Well, it was never proposed to be any more than this in many ways, because President Putin made him the offer in a televised address in the early hours of Sunday morning, and it came just after there had been the meeting here in Kyiv with the EU leaders and also President Zelenskyy and 30 others online, this coalition of the willing, who basically said that if there was not some kind of ceasefire by Monday, there would be very severe sanctions placed upon Russia. Now, President Putin's response was to offer this proposal of unconditional direct talks. It completely ignored that proposal about the ceasefire, and tellingly, when he made the offer, he certainly did not say that he would come along. He didn't say who would be part of the talks, and I think it was always seen as something of a smokescreen and not necessarily anything that would give great hope. The Ukrainians tried to wrong step President Putin by saying, well, that's it. If you're offering these talks, President Zelenskyy said, I will go along and I will expect to see you there. And there was something of the sort of schoolyard threat. Let's meet in Turkey on Thursday. I'll be there, you be there. Of course, it was unlikely that President Putin was ever going to do that. But what the Ukrainians did achieve in doing that was making the point that they were not an obstacle to peace, that they wished to find peace in this country, that they wished to find a peace or at least a ceasefire at this point to this war. And by his very presence in Turkey, President Zelenskyy was making that clear. But obviously, as he said yesterday, we aren't going to go around the world trying to find President Putin to put proposals to him. Either he's serious to end this war or he's not. And the view from the Ukrainian side is very much, and I think it is shared by other leaders, certainly European leaders, that President Putin is not convinced that he wants to finish this war. And in many ways, he has no reason to at this point.
So, Emma, to make any real progress, do you think it has to be Trump sat at a table to move Putin anywhere near towards it?
I'm not sure that Trump is necessarily the trump card, for want of a better description. He seems to think he is the man that can bring peace to this situation, but he's thought he's the man that could make a deal and bring peace in other situations, and we haven't seen that materialise yet. Don't forget, this is a war that he said he would have over within the course of a day, and it's a war that he said would be over within a course of 100 days. Both those deadlines have passed without any tangible difference being made. Yes, it is possible that President Trump could make the difference. It is possible that he could sit down with Vladimir Putin and the two men could thrash something out. But let's be realistic about this. You know, anybody can finish a war if they offer to the antagonist what they want to hear. What the Ukrainians are really worried about is what President Trump will offer up to President Putin to try and get some kind of peace, and whether or not that peace will be actually something that they can live with. Is it going to be that they lose huge swathes of their territory? Is it going to be that they have to give up so much of Ukraine that this fight has been utterly worthless? So I think whilst President Trump might think he can get a deal with President Putin, A, it's not definite that he will, and B, it's certainly not definite that the Ukrainians, although they do need American support, would be willing to accept any peace deal that is cooked up between the between the Russians and the Americans without the presence of the Ukrainians in those talks.
And it definitely wouldn't be any kind of quick deal, which Trump seems to favour. Emma, thank you very, very much indeed, as always, for your analysis. Take care. Bye-bye.